In 1999, a multi-million-dollar NASA Mars climate orbiter was completing this massive, 286-day journey through space.
Oh, man, I know this story. It is a rough one.
It really is. I mean, it was supposed to gently enter the Martian atmosphere, but instead it completely smashed into the planet and just burned up.
And the reason why is, well, it's almost embarrassing.
Right. One engineering team used metric units for their calculations, and another team used imperial units. Nobody bothered to reconcile the two.
Which is just a painfully historical lesson in data integrity.
Mm-hmm.
Because raw information, I mean, no matter how hard won it is inherently dangerous if it hasn't gone through a rigorous pipeline.
Yeah, you don't just get a slightly wrong answer. You crash a whole spaceship. And, if you're listening to this right now, you probably get those stakes.
Absolutely, because you are gearing up for the UGC NET Paper 1 exam, and you really need to master the Research Aptitude section.
Exactly, and ideally without, falling asleep in a huge stack of textbooks. So, welcome to today's deep dive.
We have a very clear mission today. We are decoding the notoriously tricky Chapter 2, Steps of Research.
Right, from that essential guidebook, UGC NET Paper 1 Unlocked, Volume 2 Research Aptitude by Dr. Aswathi VP.
And we're really zooming in on the absolute critical phase of the research journey, which is data analysis and hypothesis testing.
Okay, let's unpack this. I mean, how do we actually turn a mountain of raw data into actual testable scientific truth?
Well, you have to start before you even have a single number in front of you. The source material outlines the chronological data analysis steps.
Which kicks off with data requirements.
Well, precisely. Right? Because you cannot measure what you haven't defined. Are you testing categorical preferences, like brand loyalty, or continuous numerical data, like exact blood pressure?
The requirement dictates the tool, which naturally leads us right into data collection, where you're gathering your primary or secondary sources.
Yeah, but once you have those surveys, you can't just run an algorithm on them. You have to move into data processing.
Okay, so that's the mechanical translation part. You take messy real-world inputs and force them into rows and columns.
Right, but just because data is in a nice little column doesn't mean it's accurate.
Oh.
Which brings us back to your NASA disaster.
Data cleaning. The single most vital step.
Without a doubt. It's not just about, deleting duplicates. It's hunting down systematic errors. If you feed unclean data into a machine learning model, it will just mathematically guarantee a flawlessly incorrect output.
Okay, so let's use a cooking analogy to make this stick. Data requirements is writing the menu, and data collection is grocery shopping.
I like this, and data processing would be like unboxing everything you bought.
Exactly, and data cleaning is washing the veggies so you don't serve your guests dirt. But then the book mentions Exploratory Data Analysis, or ED.
Yes, ED is your final reality check. It's where you actually visualize the raw data set to find bizarre outliers.
So ED is like tasting the raw ingredients to make sure they aren't terrible before you actually start cooking.
That's perfect, because if you skip exploratory data analysis, you might miss that someone typed 999 for their age, and suddenly your results assume you have immortals in your study.
Right. So then we finally get to the cooking, which is applying algorithms and mathematical models.
Exactly. The algorithms do the heavy lifting to find predictive outcomes, and that ultimately results in the data product.
Which is the meal you finally serve. The data product is a functional tool, like a live hospital dashboard.
Right. And for the exam, you cannot afford to mix up this order. We need our first memory code.
Okay, hit me. What's the mnemonic?
It's the 4-keyword acronym, CCEE. Collect, clean, explore, execute.
Collect, clean, explore, execute. I love that. So our pipeline has spit out a finished data product. We have 10,000 rows of numbers.
But a mountain of numbers is, cognitively useless to us. We need data measure to find the central tendency.
Which brings us to the techniques of data analysis. And I know most candidates know mean, median, and mode.
Sure, but the exam tests when to use them. The mean, or the average, is highly sensitive to outliers.
While the median is just the exact physical middle value, right? So it's incredibly robust against extreme numbers.
Exactly. But central tendency is just one anchor point. To understand the spread, you have to look at standard deviation.
Right. So if standard deviation is low, everything is clustered tightly around the mean.
Yeah. And alongside that, you have basic tools like percentage, making things out of 100, and frequency distribution.
Which is just like counting how often each specific value appears. But wait, I want to push back on one metric the book highlights.
Go for it.
The coefficient of variation, or CV. Why do we need that if we literally just calculated the standard deviation? Isn't it just redundant?
It really seems like it until you change the context. Standard deviation is an absolute measure anchored to your specific data set's units.
Oh, so if I need to compare two totally different things.
Then you need the coefficient of variation. It divides the standard deviation by the mean to give you a relative percentage.
So it lets you compare apples and oranges, like a stable government bond versus a volatile tech stock.
Exactly. The CV normalizes the spread. A higher CV always means a higher level of relative fluctuation, which means higher risk.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
So those are individual metrics, but what about when variables interact? That's correlation and regression.
The two concepts junior researchers constantly conflate. Correlation is measured by the correlation coefficient, represented as rho or R.
Right. Checking if variable A and variable B move together from -1 to +1.
But, and this is key, just because they move together doesn't mean one causes the other.
Okay, so if I notice that people carrying umbrellas are also wearing rain boots, that's correlation. But regression is proving the rain actually causes both, right?
Exactly.
Because otherwise, I might think putting on rain boots literally summons the rain from the sky.
And that is the exact trap. Correlation spots the pattern. Regression investigates the mechanism. It isolates the cause and effect impact.
Okay, so let's give the listeners the second memory code for techniques of data analysis.
You just need to remember 4 action words: deviate, distribute, correlate, regress.
Deviate, distribute, correlate, regress.
Got it. So if we take that frequency distribution and we plot it on a graph, what shape does it make?
Well, according to the book, the physical shape dictates how you interpret reality. The mathematical ideal is the normal distribution.
The famous bell curve.
Right. It's perfectly symmetrical. And beautifully, the mean, median, and mode all land right on the exact same number at the center.
And that's where the 68, 95, 99.7 rule comes in, right?
Yeah.
Even the quartiles in a normal distribution are evenly spaced.
Yes. But, the real world is chaotic. It rarely gives us a perfect bell curve. Usually we deal with a non-normal distribution.
Or specifically a non-normal asymmetric distribution. It's where we get into skewness.
Right. Skewness happens when data gets dragged out to one side. The direction of that tail defines the skew.
Okay, imagine graphing the net worth of everyone sitting in your train car right now. You've got a massive peak of middle-class salaries.
But then a multi-billionaire boards the train. Exactly. That one massive data point pulls the whole tail violently out to the right side of the graph, making it a positive or right-skewed distribution.
Which breaks the symmetry. The billionaire's wealth drags the mean up, making it higher than the median.
Because the median, the person physically sitting in the middle seat, hasn't changed at all.
That is a critical exam insight. And the inverse is a negative or left-skewed distribution, like the age of retirement.
Right, because most people retire in their 60s, creating a peak on the right.
Yeah.
But early retirees in their 30s pull the tail to the left.
Exactly. But then the source material introduces kurtosis, which is about the vertical shape, the sharpness of the peak.
Okay, so if skewness is horizontal, kurtosis is vertical.
Yes. A standard bell curve is mesocurtic. But if you have extreme outliers, you get heavy tails and a tall, sharp spike. That's leptocurtic.
And if it's flat with very few outliers, it's platocurtic.
Right, and memorizing those Greek prefixes is mandatory for the UGC NET.
I know this is super juvenile, but my mnemonic for kurtosis is just visual wordplay. Platocurtic sounds like a platypus flat on the ground.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And leptocurtic sounds like leaping a tall, sharp peak jumping straight up. It's dumb, but it genuinely saves you points on test day.
Hey, if it works, it works. So that gives us our third memory code, bell, skew, peak.
Bell, skew, peak. Establish the bell curve, locate the skew, measure the peak. But wait, we haven't actually proven anything yet.
No, we haven't. An observation isn't a scientific fact. We need data visualization and hypothesis testing.
Visualization is the easy part, right? Heat maps, scatter plots. But data analysis and hypothesis testing, why is that so tricky?
Because you have to start from a counterintuitive position. You must always assume the null hypothesis is true.
The null hypothesis, H0, which basically says, your theory is completely wrong and there's no effect. Why do scientists assume they're wrong right out of the gate?
Because the burden of proof is on you. It prevents confirmation bias.
Oh, it's exactly like a courtroom. The data is innocent until proven guilty. You have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the null is false.
That's a great analogy. Just remember one trap. In statistics, we never say the null hypothesis is innocent. We just say we failed to reject it.
Wow, okay. That's a huge distinction. We either reject it or fail to reject it based on the p-value and our significance level, usually 0.05.
Right. If your p-value is less than 0.05, you reject the null. And you can test this with a one-tailed test looking in one specific direction or a two-tailed test, checking for any difference at all.
But obviously the math isn't flawless, which is where testing errors come in.
Yes, type I error, or alpha, is rejecting a true null. You just sent an innocent person to jail.
And a type 2 error, or beta, is failing to reject a false null. You let a guilty person go free.
Exactly. So our fourth memory code is visualize, null, test, reject.
Visualize, null, test, reject. Awesome. We've covered an insane amount of ground today.
We really have. So let's give them the ultimate end-of-session memory hack. The 4 C's of research data: clean, calculate, curve, conclude.
Okay, let's break that down. First, clean. That's our data analysis steps, CCEE.
Second, calculate. Those are the techniques and measures: deviate, distribute, correlate, regress.
Third, curve. The distributions and skewness. Bell, skew, peak.
And finally, conclude. That's hypothesis testing. Visualize, null, test, reject. Clean, calculate, curve, conclude.
If you internalize that, you've mastered Chapter 2. And honestly, if you want to completely crush the UGC NET Paper 1 exam, getting your hands on UGC NET Paper 1 Unlocked, Volume 2 Research Aptitude by Dr. Aswathi VP is the smartest move you can make.
It really is a must-have survival guide. It turns terrifying statistics into highly scoring points.
Well said. But before we go, I want to leave everyone with a lingering thought. We talked so much about the normal distribution today.
The bell curve.
Yeah, it's staggering how much of human existence, our heights, test scores, everything just perfectly organizes itself into this predictable shape.
It is, yeah.
So if the vast majority of our behaviors reliably fall into mathematically predetermined clusters under a curve, do we actually have as much free will as we think?
Oh, wow. That is a heavy question.
Or are we all just predictable data points waiting to be plotted? Think about that the next time you make a totally random decision. Thanks for diving deep with us today.